This is always fun. You never seen those before and after things where somebody loses a lot of weight? Well, this is one that just exposes a tremendous lack of integrity, not so much weight. Here is Mick Mulvaney with Maria Bartiromo, and he is at the Michael Milken Institute. Do you guys know who Michael Milken is?
Go to jail.
Yeah, he went to jail for
some
junk bonds. Yeah. Well, now he set up an institute that to do damage on society in a different way, and that is to give Mick Mulvaney and Maria Bartiromo a platform to discuss anything. And here's Mick Mulvaney explaining how about why it's important to have deficit spending on the infrastructure bill, and talking about how, deficit schmeficits. Remember, this is a Freedom Caucus guy.
Mnuchin up because Mnuchin has to finance the damn thing. I worry about exogenous shocks to the system where if something happens specifically or particularly overseas that caused some type of crisis, typically we'd be able to fall back on our borrowing ability to sort of get us through that. And I don't know if you can do that when you're $22 trillion in debt. At the same time, I'll be the first to admit that I've been complaining about the debt since I ran in 2009. It doesn't seem to be holding us back from an economic standpoint yet. I don't know if things are different when you're the reserve currency. I think you're in uncharted waters. I think it's always probably safer to have less debt than more. But I don't think debt is really driving the conversation about infrastructure.
Yeah, let's just go back. It wasn't just 2009, 2011, where this guy was basically saying the world is going to blow up because of our debt and our deficit.
It will not like it if the country were to go forward with the Republican Study Committee proposal for such what they call drastic cuts.
There's a lot of good concepts there. You read it through very quickly, but he talks about the debt to GDP ratio, the deficit to GDP ratio, a lot of important concepts. I disagree with this concept that we can't afford to do it right now. In fact, we can't afford to wait. We've talked about the level of deficits. We've talked about the exposure that the country has, Greta, to interest rate shocks. For example, we're $14 trillion in debt. Last year, we spent about $250 billion in interest payments. Relatively small portion of our budget last year. That's because we were only paying about 2% interest on the money that we had borrowed. The historical average on that debt, on our interest carry, is about 6%. So we take that number to 6%, we get to an average in the next year or two, and you're talking about interest payments alone that could approach $1 trillion.
There he is. He's very concerned about debt at that point. And of course, the real point of this is there were plenty of people saying in 2011 and in 2010 and in 2009, 2012, that deficits, particularly then, and our debt, particularly then, but also in general, but particularly then, were not an issue of concern at all. Now, I know there were voices out there, authoritative voices, because I was saying that, and I only knew that because I was reading them. And so the failure here is not that Mick Mulvaney is full of crap. The failure is that the media would just harp on these things and would allow us as a country to believe it, to the point where you had Barack Obama saying, I'm not going to argue about the deficit hawkery. I'm just going to impose austerity. And granted, it wasn't as much austerity as they got in Europe, which is why that we're doing better than they were doing in Europe. But still, that $700 billion, 770, I guess it was, billion-dollar stimulus, 2/3 of it was tax cuts. There was just not enough money spent. And many of our problems, I think, are a function of that. But it was a failure of the media at the end of the day. I mean, just totally a failure of the media. Certainly it was knowable because I know it was noble because I knew it. And I did not come up with that conclusion myself. It was just a function of a lot of legitimate voices with legitimate arguments.